The chamber was an exercise in sterile indifference. 3 solid walls forged from a matte alloy that absorbed light, absorbed sound and hope with equal efficiency. The 4th was a sheet of thick, reinforced glass. Seamless curves joined one another, a design choice presenting a continuous, flawless surface. The thin air vibrated with the low frequencies of a warship dying a slow, protracted death. Every so often, the deck plates would shudder, a deep metallic groan that spoke of failing structural integrity and a cause that was failing with it. Leland Rose sat bound to a chair bolted to the center floor. The restraints were cold and unyielding, magnetic cuffs that clamped around his wrists and ankles with impersonal firmness. He had served as a diplomatic attaché for 23 years, representing the Terran coalition in postings that range from serene garden worlds to simmering conflict zones on the edge of charted space. His career had placed him in rooms far more opulent and far more dangerous than this one. He had learned the art of patience, of observing the minute details that betrayed the grand strategies of his counterparts. He regulated his breathing, keeping his heart rate a steady metronomic beat. Panic was a currency he refused to spend. His reflection, a distorted, elongated ghost, wavered on the reinforced glass's surface, showing a man in his mid-40s, his dark hair showing the first incursions of gray at the temples. A fine network of lines earned from too many sleepless nights spent dissecting treaties and failed compromises, etched a face usually composed in thoughtful neutrality. He looked tired. Beyond the glass, in the observation room's muted amber light, 2 figures stood motionless, their forms stark silhouettes against the glowing consoles. They were Vorites, a species whose civilization had risen and now seemed intent on tearing itself apart. Their bodies consisted of a sleek integument that resembled carved, lightless stone yet moved with unnerving fluidity. The one on the left was slighter, his bearing taut with an authority that seemed ill-fitting. This was the commander. The other was broader, her shell scarred and dulled, marked by the passage of time and war. She stood a half-step behind him, her posture a study in duty. The commander, Vardas, lifted a 3-taloned hand and gestured towards a console. The resonating membranes across his face, a complex and expressive feature of Vorite anatomy, pulsed with faint light as he clicked sharply, a dry sound that cut through the ship's low thrum. "Begin the invocation," Vardas commanded. A dispassionate machine translated his voice. A series of resonant, guttural clicks and whistles filtered through the comms into Leland's chamber, into stark, monotonic Terran standard. The older Vorite, Genshi, moved with spare, deliberate movements. Her scarred talons rested on the control surface, the console's pale light reflecting in her deep, mercurial optics. Each of her eyes, a single pool of liquid silver, captured a perfect, holistic image of the scene, their last hope. She kept her gaze fixed on the console. The shape of his desperation was intimately familiar. It was the same shape as her own, only sharper, more brittle with the inexperience of youth. She initiated the sequence. In the observation room, a low hum intensified. Vardas fixed his attention on the human. This war, this ship, this dwindling faction of separatists who believed the Vorite Imperium had betrayed their ancestral nests, they were his inheritance. Promotion came after the Silene ambush vaporized his entire chain of command. He was a commander of ghosts, leading a fleet of embers, and this human was his last chance to stoke them into a fire. "He appears calm," Genshi noted, her translated voice as flat as the alloy walls. "His physiological signs are well within baseline for a resting state." "It is a facade," Vardas clicked, the membranes on his face tight with conviction. "A Terran discipline. They train their diplomats to conceal, to project a false anchor of stability. We will unravel this lie, all the way to its hollow core." He leaned closer to the glass, attempting to pierce the human's composure with his gaze. He needed this to work. Their weapon relied on a targeted effect over crude destructive power, a tool designed to sever the enemy's mind from his will. A recording of a babbling, screaming human diplomat, broken by a fear he could articulate, would shatter the coalition's resolve. This would prove that humans, for all their bluster and their sprawling fleets, were just as fragile as anyone else. This would force them back to the negotiating table, and this time, the Separatists would have leverage. The memory of his fallen comrades demanded it. The hum in Leland's chamber deepened in pitch. From panels concealed in the ceiling, 6 small spherical drones detached themselves. They were the size of a man's fist, their surfaces the same matte black as the walls. They drifted down, arranging themselves in a hexagon around his chair, hovering a few feet from his head. They hovered. Their presence, a faint displacement of air, felt more than heard. Leland remained still, tracking each drone's movement with his peripheral vision. Drills for this scenario, interrogation techniques, psychological stressors, endurance tests, were standard. His study of the Vorite Civil War indicated the Separatists were on the brink of collapse. Desperate people did desperate things. He focused on his breathing. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 6. An old technique to center the mind, taught to him by a coalition crisis counselor years ago. It had seen him through more than one tense standoff. In the observation room, Vardis watched the data stream across the main console. "The scanners are active," he announced, his voice a low thrum. "They are mapping his synaptic architecture now." Genshi monitored the readouts. Intricate glowing webs bloomed on the screen, a 3-dimensional representation of human brain activity. The drones were bathing him in a low-energy scanning field, a technology the Separatists had perfected over generations of internal conflict. A form of neurological cartography, it charted the winding pathways of thought and memory. "Focus the analysis on the limbic system," Vardis ordered. "Amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus. Find the seat of his fear." "Targeting parameters locked, Commander," Genshi confirmed, her talons tapping across the console. "The system is searching for the memory engram with the highest overall neurochemical amplitude. It seeks the primal signature, the foundational emotional imprint that shaped his entire crisis response mechanism. In most targets, that imprint is fear. In some, it is something else." The membranes across Vardis's face parted in a grim approximation of a Vorite smile. He gestured toward the display, which now showed a complex chemical chain, assembling molecule by molecule. "This agent is subtle. This agent moves beyond inducing a state of panic. Its effect is far more personal." The drones analyzed the target's unique synaptic pathways for the most foundational terror, a memory buried since childhood, a phobia imprinted on the soul. Once the system isolates the signature, the device's microfabricators synthesize a bespoke olfactive compound, a precisely tuned blend designed to trip that exact memory. To the subject, the terror will feel resurrected. He will relive the worst moment of his existence, saturated in every sensory detail. He tapped a talon against the glass, the sound a sharp tick in the quiet room. "He will break himself, and we will record every moment of it." A faint, tingling sensation ghosted across Leland's scalp, the scanning field's subtle pressure at work. He closed his eyes to narrow his focus. He tried to build a fortress in his mind, a sanctuary made of logic and procedure. He thought of Coalition Protocol 12 Gamma, resisting psychological manipulation. He recited the periodic table's first 12 elements. He visualized the star charts of his home sector. He tried to make his mind a place of impenetrable order and steel. But behind the ordered lists and the cold, hard facts, other, more complex memories stirred. The scent of rain on dry asphalt, the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder, just before he left for the last time. The brittle sound of his mother's voice over a long-distance comm, stretched thin by a distance that was more than just light years. And underneath it all, a warmer memory, a recollection he kept locked away in a quiet, sunlit room in the back of his mind. A memory of safety. The drone's humming stopped. The tingling sensation vanished. On the console in the observation room, a single, complex molecule glowed with a soft green light. "Synthesis complete," Genshi announced, her voice flat. Vardis straightened, his entire frame rigid. "Release the agent." A soft hiss from vents in the ceiling preceded any sight or smell. He opened his eyes. A faint, nearly colorless mist that warped the air seeped into the chamber. It swirled in the stagnant atmosphere, catching the dim light in lazy, opalescent currents. He braced himself. He tensed the muscles in his jaw, his shoulders, his legs. He prepared for agony. He expected the sudden, cold grip of irrational panic, the phantom sensation of falling or drowning or being buried alive. He anticipated monstrous apparitions coalescing from the mist, nightmares given form. A veiled, inviolable enemy was about to invade and ransack his mind, the diplomat's well-ordered office. He took a breath. He had to. The mist was filling the room, displacing the existing air. It entered his lungs, a cool, neutral vapor. He held the breath, his heart beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs, counting down to a terror he could not yet name. He exhaled. He took another breath, deeper this time. A slow, gentle unfurling, a blooming of sensation at the back of his throat, at the top of his sinuses. A scent. At first, a faint suggestion. The warm, sweet, and faintly woody fragrance posed a question to his memory. The smell was deeply, achingly familiar. He frowned. This felt wrong. Fear should be cold, sharp, metallic. The smell of blood and superheated steel, the scent of a predator on the wind. Not this. The scent grew stronger, saturating the air, every breath he took drawing it deeper into him. It was a complex, layered aroma. The smell spoke of ground spice, of melting butter and caramelized sugar, of something warm and wholesome baking in an oven. The fragrance was his grandmother's kitchen on a cold winter afternoon. His constructed mental fortress, the walls of logic and protocol, dissolved with a surprising gentleness. The sterile gray chamber around him receded, its hard lines blurring at the edges of his vision. The cold restraints on his wrists became a distant, trivial fact. The dying ship's hum faded into a background drone, replaced by a different sound. The gentle ticking of a grandfather clock, the muffled sound of children laughing in the snow outside, the soft, rhythmic scrape of a wooden spoon against a ceramic bowl. He shed the identity of Leland Rowe, diplomatic attaché for the Terran Coalition, prisoner to the Vorite separatists. He became Ian, a boy of 8, sitting at a worn wooden table dangling his feet inches above the faded linoleum floor. The afternoon sun, low and golden, streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, captured stars. And the air itself was thick with the smell of cinnamon. The rigid tension in Leland Rowe's shoulders and neck slackened. The hard, defiant set of his jaw softened. His breathing, once meticulously controlled, deepened into a slow, steady rhythm, as if he were on the verge of sleep. His focus altered, his darting gaze, which had catalogued threats and escape routes, now fixed on the far wall, seeing through the cold, gray alloy to something else entirely, something a long way away, and a long time ago. His professional calm, concealing a readiness for conflict, transformed. His brow furrowed as he tried to reconcile the input from his senses with the reality of his situation. As the memory took complete hold, his brow smoothed, and the confusion gave way to a profound, open tenderness. He searched the room for a source, for the origin of a comfort he thought he had lost forever. In the observation room, Vardas and Genshi stared at their monitors. The readouts were a storm of contradictions, a biological paradox playing out in real time. "Report!" Vardas demanded, his voice a low, dangerous click. Genshi's talons traced the glowing lines on the screen. "Limbic activity is off the charts, Commander. The spike is higher than any recorded response. We have a total saturation response in the amygdala and hippocampus. The weapon has worked. It has triggered a memory of immense power." "Then why isn't he screaming?" Vardas snapped, gesturing at the placid figure in the chair. "Why does he look like he's listening to a pleasant symphony?" "I have no explanation." Genshi switched the display to the human's vital signs. "Heart rate is decreasing. Now 62 beats per minute. Respiratory rate is 8 breaths per minute, deep and regular. Endorphin levels are rising. Cortisol and adrenaline remain near baseline." She paused, running the diagnostic again. "Commander, biologically speaking, he is exhibiting the signs of profound calm. Contentment, even." Vardas stared at the screen, then at the human. The science was absolute. The machine only unlocked the subject's own emotion. The process found the memory of a wound and poured salt in it. Had they miscalculated? Was it possible for a creature's deepest, most primal memory, the one that shaped its entire threat response system, to be one of peace? This was a tactical and philosophical contradiction. Fear was the great unifier, the bedrock of survival for every sentient species they had ever encountered. "It's a trick," Vardas hissed. "A human deception, some kind of psychological resistance technique that we overlooked." "The neurological scans are definitive," Genshi countered, her tone neutral. "Faking a synaptic response is beyond any known capability. We triggered the memory. This is his genuine reaction to it." To him, the human's serene expression was a mockery, a deliberate act of defiance against his authority, against the memory of all the Vorites who had died for this cause. The failure of his last weapon signaled the final dying gasp of their rebellion. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on Leland's cheek. The memory's vivid, complete nature erased the 40 years that separated him from it. He could feel the sun's warmth on his face, smell the wood smoke from the fireplace, taste the promise from the sweet, spicy dough his grandmother was preparing. She was there, just at the edge of his vision, her back to him as she worked at the counter. Her hair, silver, was in a loose bun. She was humming a tune lost for decades, a simple, looping folk song from old Earth. He was safe. In this kitchen, with that smell in the air, he was utterly safe. The fractures in his family, the cold silence of his parents' arguments, the vast, lonely galaxy outside, all of it remained outside this sanctuary. This place, this scent, was his anchor. He remembered details that surprised him with their clarity, the way the flour had settled into the creases of her knuckles, the small ceramic jar shaped like a sleeping cat where she kept her cinnamon, its lid chipped from years of use, the way she would test the dough's consistency by pressing her thumb into its soft surface, nodding to herself with quiet satisfaction. He remembered how she would sometimes pause in her work to look out the window at the falling snow, her expression both content and touched by some distant melancholy he was too young to understand. Once, during one of those long winter afternoons, she had caught him watching her and smiled. She had wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the kitchen to where he sat, her footsteps soft on the worn linoleum. She had cupped his face in her flour-dusted hands and looked at him with such complete attention that he had felt, for that moment, like the only person in the universe who mattered. "You carry so much worry for such a small boy," she had said to him, her voice gentle. "Your parents, their troubles, that's not your weight to bear. Do you understand?" He hadn't understood, not really, but he had nodded, and she had pressed her lips to his forehead, leaving a faint trace of flour on his skin. "Some people," she had continued, returning to her work, "they think strength means being hard, being cold. But that's not strength, Ian. That's just fear wearing a mask." She had begun kneading the dough again, her movements sure and rhythmic. "Real strength is staying soft when the world tries to harden you. It's remembering how to feel even when feeling hurts." He had carried those words with him through the decades that followed, even as he had learned to compose his features into diplomatic neutrality, to project calm authority in rooms where empires negotiated their futures. He had thought he understood them. He had been wrong. He was only now, in this impossible moment, beginning to grasp their true weight. He bowed his head, the returning memory's weight overwhelming him. He whispered a single word, his voice raspy with disuse. "Cinnamon." The word hung in the chamber's sterile air, a fragile organic thing in a world of metal and despair. The word was an invocation, a prayer. He took another deep breath of the manufactured scent, and the memory intensified, washing over him in a warm, comforting wave. A sob caught in his throat. He spoke again, his voice cracking. The words meant only for the boy he used to be. "It smells like home." The words, translated and broadcast into the observation room, landed with jarring force. Home. Vardas slammed a clenched talon against the console, the impact creating a spiderweb of cracks on the display screen. Genshi flinched, remaining silent. "A trick!" Vardas seethed, his vocal membranes vibrating. "He is mocking us. turning our strength into a farce. He rounded on Genshi. Increase the concentration. Flood the chamber until he chokes on it. Commander, the agent has reached maximum effective concentration. Genshi reported, her voice steady. Increasing it further would be redundant. Redundant? Vardas fixed his mercurial optics on her. Our greatest psychological weapon is inducing pleasant nostalgia, and redundancy is your focus? The weapon has failed. It has worked, Genshi corrected him. It has failed to produce the result we expected. The calm human and the ruin of his plans dominated his thoughts. All the stories he had heard about the terror gas and its effectiveness, all the legends of broken enemies, all of it turned to dust. The human had defeated it by remembering. If the machine failed, Vardas would break him personally. He strode out of the observation room and into the corridor, toward the sealed entryway to the interrogation chamber. Commander, what are you doing? Genshi asked, alarm in her voice. I am going to get an explanation. He growled. I will tear the truth from his throat with my own talons. The agent is still active. The agent saturates the chamber. The synthesis targeted his neurochemistry. Vardas retorted, his hand already on the emergency override panel. To a vorite, it is inert vapor. He will face me. He slammed his talon onto the panel. Warning lights flashed. A klaxon blared. He stabbed the mute control with a sharp, impatient gesture. The chamber door's heavy metallic lock disengaged for a single cycle with a loud, percussive clank. He would confront this human face to face and make him understand the cost of his defiance. The door to the chamber hissed open, sliding into the wall with a final, decisive thud. The mist, the scent of cinnamon and memory, swirled out into the corridor, thinning as it met the ship's harsh atmosphere. Commander Vardas stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure carved from nightstone. Behind him, the door cycled shut again, sealing the chamber and trapping the remaining cinnamon-sweet haze inside. The inert vapor washed over him. To him, it was just air. He marched directly to Leland, who remained lost in his reverie, his head hung low. Vardas grabbed the front of the human's tunic, hauling him forward until the restraints pulled taut and the chair complained against its bolts. The fabric strained, and Leland's head snapped back. What is this game, human? Vardas demanded, his translated voice booming in the small space. He brought his face close to Leland's, the intricate, terrifying geometry of his alien features dominating the man's vision. What trickery is this? Do you think we are fools? Explain yourself. Leland blinked, focusing his eyes. The Vorite commander loomed before him. The mercurial optics, the trembling vocal membranes, a tight grip on his collar strained his neck. The commander's rage was a distant storm, loud but kept at bay by the warm, sunlit safety of his grandmother's kitchen. He looked through Vardas. His gaze distant, Leland spoke. His voice was soft, conversational. He was speaking to the ghost in the room, the memory that the gas had so vividly resurrected. The sun always came through that window in the afternoon, he murmured, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over Vardas's shoulder. It hit the flower on the counter, and it appeared. It seemed as if gold dust covered everything. She never let me help with the cinnamon rolls. She said I was too impatient, that I lacked the patience to wait for the dough to rise. A small, sad smile touched his lips. She was right. I never learned how to wait for the things that mattered. He glanced down at his own hands, still cuffed, and for a moment they appeared small and clumsy, covered in a fine white powder. She'd let me watch, though. Her hands were always moving. Strong hands. Wrinkles and age spots covered them, yet they were always in motion. She would knead the dough and hum this little song. I have forgotten the words now, just the tune. He hummed a few broken bars, a faint, breathy melody. When she put them in the oven, the whole house would change. It was like that smell. It filled up all the empty spaces. My parents were always fighting back then, and the house was loud with their silent tensions. But in her kitchen, the silence was a good thing. The silence was peaceful. He refocused his gaze, and he looked at the Vorite holding him, truly seeing him for the first time since the mist filled the room. "It was the only place I ever felt safe." Vardas stared, his grip faltering. The words echoed in the chamber, painting a picture in his mind. A sunlit room, a humming elder, a small, lonely child. These concepts transcended species. Sunlit nests, the soft clicks and whistles of his own clutch mother. These were familiar memories. He remembered being a young grub frightened by the vast, indifferent world. He released his grip on Leland's tunic. The human slumped back into the chair, his breath coming out in a ragged sigh. Vardas took a reflexive step back, then another. He looked from the human to the drones still hovering silently, then to the vents in the ceiling. He, Commander Vardas, in a last desperate attempt to inspire terror, had instead given his prisoner a gift. The realization pressed down on his somatic shell, making it hard to breathe. Leland's focus returned to the chamber's grim reality. The memory was fading at the edges, the sunlit kitchen receding, the cold gray walls reasserting themselves. The scent was still there, a reminder of what he had lost. Past the monster and the enemy, a young officer emerged, burdened by a war he had inherited, buckling under a weight that crushed him. The exhaustion in the slight slump of his shoulders, the desperation in the tense set of his vocal membranes became visible. A mirror of his own loss refracted through an alien form appeared before him. The scent was a gift, and it was already fading. Panic, real and sharp, flared in his chest for the first time, for the loss of this connection to his past. He gave Vardas a pleading look, leaving only the grieving man behind. "Please," he asked, his voice thick, the words scraping his throat. "Can you leave it on for a little longer?" The request struck Vardas with the force of a plasma bolt, a plea for a memory, a plea for a scent, a plea to remain in the beautiful, painless prison the gas had created for him. All the certainties of his life, duty, honor, victory, vengeance, felt like brittle, empty shells. He stared at the human, at the tear track on his face, at the genuine, desperate hope in his expression. His vocal membranes worked silently, clicking and unclicking as he struggled to process the paradigm shift that had occurred in this room. The protocols of war were silent on this, so he acted on a raw, primal instinct. He stepped behind Leland's chair. With a series of sharp, deliberate clicks, he deactivated the magnetic restraints. First the ankles, then the wrists. The cuffs sprang open with a soft hiss. Leland tentatively lifted his hands. He rubbed his wrists, the skin red and chafed. He stared at his freed hands, then up at the towering, silent Vorite behind him. His status as prisoner dissolved, yet he remained in a locked room on an enemy warship, saturated with a chemical agent that had accidentally become his salvation. Leland got to his feet, his legs stiff from the bonds. He stood before the young, exhausted Vorite commander as an equal. He looked into the depths of Vardas's mercurial optics. He asked a question. "Who was the first person you lost in this war?" The question hit Vardas like a concussive blast. His breath caught. All the aggression, all the authority he had cultivated, all the brittle armor he used to shield himself from the grief that fueled him. It all cracked. His vocal membranes trembled, a violent tremor. He tried to retort. He tried to summon a threat, to re-establish the room's hierarchy. "You are the prisoner here. You do not ask the questions." But the muscles in his throat constricted, the sounds dying before they could form. The question was a first. Requests arrived for situation reports, for casualty numbers, for strategies and contingency plans. He was asked to be a commander, never about his loss. They all had their own. Speaking of it was a weakness, a self-indulgence in the face of their dying cause. One was supposed to pack your grief down, let it harden into fuel for the fight. But the fuel was running out, and all that remained was the hollow ache. Leland saw the struggle in the Vorite's posture. He waited. Instead, he offered a piece of his own, a gesture of trust in this enemy who had, moments ago, intended to break his mind. "My grandmother," Leland said, his voice quiet, filling the silent room. "Her name was Leora. She raised me after my parents. Went their separate ways. She was my anchor." He looked at the floor, the memories now sharp and clear. When she died, I was at the academy, halfway across the sector. I arrived too late for the funeral. I came back to her house a month later. It was empty. The bank had already sold it. He took a slow breath, the scent of cinnamon still clinging to the air. The new owners had painted everything, a sterile, chemical white. But the thing I remember most, the thing that truly broke me, was the silence. Sound always filled her house. There was always the clock, or her humming, or the radio playing old music. But now, the room held only the sound of my own breathing. He looked up, meeting Vardas's gaze. And the smell had vanished. I tried to bake her recipe once, years later. I bought all the ingredients, followed her instructions perfectly. The house just smelled like sugar. It never smelled like cinnamon again. It never smelled like home. Vardas's rigid military posture broke. His legs gave way, and he sank to the floor, his armored limbs folding awkwardly. He sat there. For a long time, he was silent. Afterward, in a low, halting voice, a series of clicks and whistles so soft the translator struggled to register them. He spoke. "Taven," he said, the name a strange and alien sound. "He was my nest brother. We emerged from the same clutch. We learned to walk on the same patch of sun-warmed stone." His voice grew rough, strained by such testimony. "The Imperium's first orbital bombardment, on our home nest. He pushed me into a crevice. Just before the plasma hit, I survived because his body shielded me. The first thing I lost was the one who should have been with me until the end." Once he spoke the first name, more followed. The litany of the dead, the ghosts he carried with him every day, emerged into the quiet room. "My mentor, old Perrin. He taught me how to read star charts. He used to say the stars' patterns were less chaotic than the patterns of politics. He died in the Silene ambush, at the command console without warning. My entire first command staff, Inaya, the pilot, she could make a freighter dance like a fighter. Pelion, my tactical officer, he was a purist, believed our cause was a holy invocation. Veneer, communications. He had 2 new hatchlings he had yet to meet. He was a survivor, reciting the names of his dead to the only person who had ever asked to hear them." From the observation room, Genshi watched the scene unfold. Her commander, the brittle, aggressive youth who had tried so hard to fill the void of leadership, sat on the floor across from the freed human captive. The rigid military posture he always maintained, the one he used as armor, dissolved. His whole body slumped with the colossal weight of his own testimony. The war had gone on for so long. Generations rose and fell before her. She had watched her own nestmates, her own clutch sisters turn to dust and memory. A deep, profound weariness lived in her somatic shell. She was tired of the fighting, tired of the loss, tired of the hollow justifications for more death. She thought of her own names, the dead she carried. There had been a time, early in the conflict, when she still believed that victory would bring meaning to the sacrifice, that the freedom they sought would fill the empty spaces left by those who had given everything. But the years had taught her a harder truth. No victory could bring back the dead, and no cause, however righteous, could justify becoming the very thing you fought against. She remembered Kellis, her bondmate, who had been killed in the 3rd year of the war. His shell had been a deep, rich amber, rare among their kind, and she had loved to watch the way light played across its surface. He had been gentle, preferring the company of his botanical gardens to the company of other Vorites. When the Imperium's forces destroyed their agricultural station, they had not only killed him, they had obliterated the gardens he had spent decades cultivating, species collected from 100 worlds, each one lovingly tended. For years she had used his death as fuel, just as Vardas now used his own losses. But somewhere along the way, the fuel had become ash, and the ash had become a weight she could barely carry. Her scarred talon moved across the console, past the weapons systems and the life support readouts. The button was small and quiet, its function purely mechanical. To press it would be an act of treason, an act of surrender, an act of hope. She hesitated for a long moment, watching the 2 figures in the room. They were so still. She thought of her commander, Vardas, a boy trying to be a warlord because all the warlords were dead. She thought of the human, who had found comfort in a weapon of terror. With a quiet click, she disengaged the seal. On the door panel, a small red light turned to a soft, quiet green. For the first time in a long time, the possibility of something other than more fighting arose. She had opened a door. Whether they would walk through it was up to them. As Vardas spoke, as he gave voice to the ghosts he carried, he confronted a truth he had long buried under layers of duty and vengeance. The war's political goals, the grand ideals of separatist freedom, had faded to abstract concepts, hollow echoes. All that remained was the brutal, grinding momentum of grief and the terrible, silent duty to honor the dead by creating more of them. The war had shed its cause. It was a self-perpetuating funeral pyre. He fell silent, the litany of names exhausted. He thought of his clutch mother. He tried to picture her face, the unique pattern on her somatic shell, the way her vocal membranes would groom him when he was a grub. He had lost the memory of her face. "I have lost the memory of her face," he whispered, the admission costing him everything. "I only remember the explosion that took her, the light, the sound. That is all I have left of her." Leland nodded. He recognized the shape of that particular wound, when the trauma of a person's death becomes more real than the memory of their life. He offered only silence. The pain was too real, too raw for such things. He lowered himself to the floor, sitting across from Vardas, mirroring his posture. Two beings, enemy and captive, commander and prisoner, sitting together in a room still thick with the scent of cinnamon and loss. The absurdity of it was not lost on him. He had negotiated treaties in palaces of crystal and light, had brokered peace in chambers designed to intimidate and impress. And here he was, on the cold metal floor of a dying warship, feeling closer to understanding than he had in any of those grand halls. He met the young commander's gaze and held it. "I know," he said, his voice quiet but firm in the scented air. "But we can start from here." The word "we" created a fragile, radical link between them. It bypassed the "we" of the Terran coalition and the "we" of the Vorite separatists. A new construct, born in this room. The "we" of two grieving souls who had accidentally found common ground at the bottom of a well of sorrow. This was the first syllable of peace. A long, quiet moment stretched into minutes. The terror gas, now a scent of comfort, lingered in the room. The 6 small drones still hovered silently, their original purpose rendered meaningless. Somewhere in the ship's depths, a bulkhead groaned, the vessel settling deeper into its slow decline. The sound seemed to come from very far away, a concern belonging to another world, another time. Neither of them moved to address it. Across from each other sat the captor and the captive, their roles dissolved. 2 beings from different worlds, united by loss. The chamber door stood, its lock disengaged, the green light on its control panel a quiet beacon in the dimness. Beyond it lay the ship's corridors, the observation room where Genchi waited, the uncertain future of 2 civilizations locked in a war that had consumed everything it touched. But for a long while, both remained. The room had become a sanctuary. The scent of cinnamon hung in the air like a promise, or perhaps a prayer, not for victory, not for revenge, but for something far more precious and far more fragile, for remembrance, for understanding, for home.